Hey guys, welcome back to Moonlight and Sleepless. Tonight we are tiptoeing up the misty slopes of Mount Olympus, that postcard summit where most travel guides suggest you pack a lightning rod just in case. Do not worry. I checked the divine forecast and Zeus has agreed to keep his thunderbolts in airplane mode for the evening. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It helps the channel drift into more dreamers' recommended feeds. While you are at it, let me know in the comments which city you are listening from and what glowing digits stare back at you on the bedside clock. Now, dim the lights, loosen the knot in your shoulders, and let us ease into tonight's journey together, slow as honey sliding down a spoon. A breath of twilight settles over the marble halls, turning gilded friezes the color of smoked roses and stretching the column shadows across the floor like sleepy felines. Hestia leans over the sacred hearth and banks the fire until the coals glow the soft orange of ripe persimmon. A gentle breeze meanders in from the distant Aegean, carrying a salty whisper of waves that once lulled sailors to doze on deck. All around the vast citadel there is no clash of armor tonight, no triumphant hymns about victorious heroes. Even Ares, freed from most of his bronze plates, cradles an unused spear as if it were a drowsing cat. High on his ivory throne, Zeus releases a yawn so wide it seems to tug the constellations nearer. His tumble of hair slips forward in pale rivulets over his shoulders. At that moment, a hush of air threads through the colonnade, more felt than heard, the faint quiver of moth wings brushing lantern paper. The sound trembles, with the promise that strength can arrive silently. Zeus stills, letting the note resonate inside the usual crackle that lives beneath his sternum. He murmurs to himself that perhaps the world can be persuaded by something gentler than thunder. One crisp finger snap echoes under the dome. In the forge below, Hephaestus awakens, soot on one cheek and sparks caught mid-flight around his beard. The smith smiles at the command. Tonight he will temper thousands of tiny wings from a metal so airy that moonlight itself may hesitate to rest upon it. Down a jasmine corridor, Aphrodite moves through night-blooming flowers. Petals sigh open beneath her fingertips, shedding silver pollen that drifts like first snow across dark hair. She stirs the fragrant dust into honey drawn from secret hives inside hollow cypress trunks, humming an old lullaby reputed to settle even the noisiest mortal heart. Each droplet becomes a seed of sleep awaiting the right breeze. Across the courtyard, Hermes sketches looping lines on a wax tablet that shine under torchlight. He charts hidden meadows where sheep bells ring with cricket song, mapping a spiral of serenity that will glide over Attica once the swarm takes flight. Hera glides past, robe whispering over marble, and reminds her drowsy husband that even a single sting can spoil tenderness if it lands on frightened skin. Preparations settle like feathers across a fresh pillow. Somewhere beyond sight, the stars adjust their rhythm to the pulse of an unseen hive, and the night begins to lean toward a silence no mortal has heard. Tonight, the King of Gods intends to wrap himself in a cloak of shimmering wings, each no heavier than a sigh, each tuned to the key of hush. Soon every creak of marble and flicker of torchlight will dissolve into the low hum of bees, and the sleeping world below will learn, if only for one brief moonrise, how softly a deity can walk when he chooses to trade thunder for lullabies. A wandering wind coaxed the shutters of Olympus to part the way a shy storyteller opens a book, page edges whispering just before a secret begins. It carried the far-off scent of olives ripening on pale hillsides, and the briny hush of waves that had traveled all afternoon, gathering lullabies in their foam. That breeze slipped between pillars painted in alternating bands of moonlight and shadow, and every bronze lamp flame bowed to its passing, as though fire itself wished to listen for once instead of crackle. Zeus, drifting half asleep upon a throne carved from thunderclouds, felt the breeze before he truly heard it. The king of storms was accustomed to crescendos the snap of lightning splitting oaks, the drum of hail on marble roofs, but this sound was smaller than a sigh. It vibrated inside the hollow, just beneath his ribs, a delicate hum so fine it might have been the heartbeat of mist. Its gentleness intrigued him. A storm seizes attention, a murmur keeps it. He lifted his head, silver curls tumbling forward like poured moonlight, and listened without summoning a single bolt. The note that reached him was part breath, part grass whistle, part shimmer of countless wings turning night into velvet. It seemed impossible that such a frail voice could have survived the roaring heights where eagles shiver, yet it arrived intact, every filament of sound unbroken. Zeus rose, unaware that his gilded scepter slid from his lap to the floor with a softened clang, and he padded barefoot across chilled stone to the balcony. Outside, cloud wisps trailed behind him in a lazy spiral, forming a brief cloak that disintegrated in the glow of starlight. At the balustrade, the wind greeted him again, twisting around his ankles, threading silver dust through the folds of his robe, and weaving up into his open palms. Within its coolness throbbed the warmth of hidden hives, and the promise of honey sealed in wax. Each breath he drew slowed his pulse, until it matched the tempo of drifting clouds. The thunder inside his chest tempered itself, exchanging iron mallets for feathered mallets, exchanging clash for tremolo. He realized with a startled softness that power could arrive silently and still alter the world. No mortal instrument could have shaped that melody. It belonged to a language older than lightning, older even than Olympus itself, the buzzing lullaby of bees. Images surfaced ancient memories of his infant cradle on Crete, where gentle drones had circled above the blankets, soothing him whenever the goat nymph paused her milk. Back then, the universe was nothing but breath, milk, and hum. Those memories had faded behind centuries of spears and prayers, yet now they slid forward, shimmering like coins lost in a fountain and suddenly found. In that recollection lay a comfort he had nearly forgotten. He inhaled resin, thyme, and the faint wood smoke of distant campfires laced with children's laughter. He exhaled, and the air around him brightened, scented gently of clover honey. Behind him, hallways full of armor and banners settled into deeper stillness. Even bronze shields longed to dream. The wind spiraled down the mountainside, carrying with it the hush of a hive and leaving invisible threads of calm for mortals to brush against in their sleep. Zeus pictured wool-wrapped shepherds, pausing mid-watch when the breeze slid across their cheeks, their foreheads unknitting. He imagined guards on city walls leaning against stones simply to hear the hum, spears forgotten at their feet while puppies dozed beside them. He saw wide decks of merchant ships where sailors, rocked by the Aegean, would let ropes slip slack, trusting the sea to cradle them a little longer. The decision unfurled within him as naturally as dawn. Thunder would rest tonight. In its place, a gentle orchestra of living wings would glide, carrying every note of that lullaby to the farthest tent flap, the highest crow's nest, the loneliest traveler crouched beside a fading fire. Dominion, he understood, might mean lowering one's voice until the world leans closer, eager to hear. He pressed both hands to the balustrade's cool marble and whispered a single vertical part's promise and prayer so softly that only the departing breeze could catch it. Sleep. Night in Delphi settles like silk across limestone ridges, dimming Apollo's columned portico until each shaft of marble resembles a harp string plucked only by starlight. Inside the Attica, where the earth's breath coils through a fissure in rock, the Pythia drifts from stern wakefulness into the loose weave of dreams. Her laurel crown tilts. Brittle leaves tap a slow metronome against the bronze tripod whenever her chin dips. Priests who shepherded pilgrims all afternoon have banked their torches, and now only the glow of pine embers paints lazy spirals on the ceiling. In that perfumed half-light, she hears Ita hush, braided from thousands of miniature threads vibrating at once. It is not parchment, nor the metallic flutter of a wick starved for oil. It is rounder than music, patient, laying itself across the air like a quilt. Her lips part. At first, she assumes she has wandered back to hillside hives beyond Crisa, but the pitch deepens, folds upon itself, and becomes a choir of wings too many for daylight to count. The hum rises and falls exactly to the rhythm of breathing, and her own lungs instinctively follow the cadence. The smell of bay leaf and distant sea salt rides the vibration, promising journeys made safe by sleep. From the vapor a solitary bee appears, its abdomen shining like amber warmed by sunrise. It hovers before her blurred gaze, then drifts to the vent where prophetic fumes curl upward. More bees follow, forming a spiral, each carrying a fleck of glittering pollen that flashes whenever the vapors tilt. Within heartbeats, the swarm assembles into a trembling sphere, luminous and self-contained, hovering in the chamber's center. From its pulse, she receives language not in Greek, but in an older, gentler tongue conveyed by scent rather than sound. Thyme and honey swirl together, shaping words she can feel on her skin. Only the patient murmur of wings can cradle the restless king. Weave thunder into honey, and the world will close its eyes. A soft shiver travels her spine. The limestone beneath her bare feet warms as though hive heat has seeped outward from the vision. She tastes honey cool, floral, edged with mountain thyme coating the back of her throat, and knows the message is certain. Moving carefully, she lifts an unglazed pottery shard from a cedar table, dips a finger into lamp soot, and draws 5 symbols. Wing, crown, spiral, drop, moon. Each line glows briefly, as though soot remembers sunlight, then settles into velvety black. The bees hover in reverent silence as she presses the shard to her breast, committing the command to memory. She feels that warmth soak into her bones, a gentle weight, as if every cell is being invited to rehearse the forgotten art of resting. An acolyte named Cleon, restless despite orders to sleep, notices the oracle stirring and approaches on hush-soft sandals. The bees, sensing mortal interruption, disperse in orderly silence, leaving behind drifting motes that resemble sparks freed from a forge. The Pythia's eyes, usually fierce with Apollo's fire, tonight shine the warm brown of polished chestnut. She sets the shard into Cleon's palms. "To Olympus," she murmurs, voice rough as parchment yet gentle as dew. "Carry the song before dawn forgets it." Cleon boasts uncertain whether this charge is vision or parable, yet feeling honey film his own tongue in confirmation. He wraps the shard in lamb's wool, shoulders a traveler's cloak, and slips through the colonnade into the cool night. 6 bees trail him like miniature lanterns of sound, their hum replacing torchlight, guiding his steps until the sacred way bends north toward Mount Helicon. Back inside the Adyton, the oracle sinks onto her tripod again. Laurel leaves rustle, releasing sharper fragrance that mingles with the last curls of time's scented steam. Vapors cradle her shoulders, her breathing slows. Somewhere within that stillness, she dreams of a bronze hive, large enough to house thunder peacefully, and of villages soothed beneath quilts of hum. Outside, an owl calls once. Its note folds neatly into the hush, and Delphi-like the world beyond exhales toward sleep. High above, constellations seem to slow their ancient march, pausing to listen to the hive-born lullaby. Hephaestus snoozed beside an anvil, the size of a fishing boat, when the summons slipped into his dreams. It was not a trumpet or a herald. It was a pulse of soft thunder that settled in his ears like a heartbeat made of brass. The forge had grown quiet after nightfall. Braziers dwindled to orange pearls. A single chain deep in the rafters ticked as it cooled. Cyclops' assistants snored under workbenches. Even the hammers rested sideways like tired dogs. A lone spark drifted from the smoke hole, bright yet silent, and landed on the anvil. Instead of dying, it spread into silver light that trembled with the unspoken syllable of Zeus. The smith god opened one soot-rimmed eye, understood, and grinned. Thunder wished to become lullaby. He dismissed the Cyclops with a gesture. From a locked chest he drew a rod of celestial iron, the alloy that falls when meteors bloom. He laid it across the anvil and felt it humming. When he lifted his hammer, he did not strike with force. Each tap was gentle as rain on a lily leaf. The rod stretched into threads as fine as cobweb, yet strong as ship cable. No clang rang out. The metal sang a glass note, the kind heard when a seashell meets your ear at dusk. Sparks rose like sleepy fireflies exploring a cavern, then winked out. Heat rolled through the chamber in velvet waves smelling of cedar and fresh bread. Hephaestus plunged the glowing ribbons into a basin of nectar, stirred with moonstone dust. Steam lifted, scented of wildflowers. When the metal cooled, it curled into delicate feathers. He lifted one between thumb and forefinger. It weighed no more than a breath. A sigh sent it sailing, where it brushed a spear without a ring. Feather after feather joined its siblings, piling like soft snow on bronze. They rustled together, a hush like reeds in evening current. Hours passed uncounted. At intervals he paused to heed the bee hum echoing inside memory. That drone guided his rhythm, steady and kind. He let the feathers rest in neat rows across a polished obsidian slab while he assembled a loom worthy of sky work. The frame was built from 3 fallen meteors fused by rivets of aurora glass. Those beams exhaled a pale arctic glow that painted blue halos on the flagstones. He stretched threads of distilled moonlight between the uprights and plucked each strand to test its voice. The pitch was low and slow, something like a whale hymn traveling beneath winter ice. That music persuaded the metal plumes to drift into alignment one by one, as though gravity itself had been rewritten into a lullaby. When the last ribbon cooled, he wove the feathers on strands of starlight into a mantle wide as a fishing net, yet lighter than a cloud. Draped over a rack, it almost floated. The cloth glimmered with inner moonlit silver. He also shaped smaller swatches, able to detach and roam as scouting bees might. The forge lamp scuttered. He closed the furnace and watched the final ember fade to rose. Only the mantle glowed, casting soft ripples along stone. He folded the fabric, though it preferred to hover, coaxed it into a round casket of sandalwood banded by bronze. On the clasp, he carved a sleeping bee. The weight surprised him, lighter than a loaf of bread, yet potent enough to calm armies. He pressed the lid until it clicked, then rested hands on warm bronze. A sigh left his chest more steam than sound. Outside, a night breeze slipped through archways, carrying time and distant surf. The breeze seemed pleased. He set the casket upon a marble sled so Hermes could whisk it away at dawn. He quenched the final torch. Darkness claimed the hall, but the hush inside the box glimmered in thought. A promise that soon the sky would hum instead of roar. The smith eased onto his cot, joints heavy yet heart gentle. As he drifted off, the sparks in his beard glowed faintly, little reminders that even fire can whisper when night asks politely. Moonlight glided across Aphrodite's private gardens, like cream swirling into dark tea, softening every statue until even cool marble seemed to blush. Barefooted, she paced a mosaic path of turquoise tesserae. Still warm from yesterday's sun, her silk robe gathering dew that refracted pinpricks of silver along her ankles. Tonight her craft was neither flirtation nor the usual choreography of rivalries. She labored for sleep itself, determined to brew a fragrance gentle enough to coax crowns from anxious brows. She began beneath an arch of night-blooming jasmine, whose petals unfurl only after the sun has slipped beneath distant capes. Pinching each blossom at its sweetest pulse, she let them tumble into a crystal bowl the color of daybreak. Their scent rose in lazy spirals, a sigh woven from moonlit thread. Nearby, lunar cereus opened like parchment lanterns. She scraped their golden filaments, sap-flashing star, bright before dripping into the bowl. From shaded beds, she gathered lavender spears, heliotrope clusters, and a rare blue poppy that leaks drowsy milk when bruised. Every petal, stamen, and drop of nectar carried a promise of hush. At the garden's heart stood an alabaster hive, fashioned long ago by industrious nymphs. The bees inside were no ordinary foragers. They feasted on blossoms that rise only where thunder once kissed bare rock. Aphrodite lifted the lid, with the care of loosening a lover's ribbon. Warm honey breath drifted out, thick enough to taste on the air. She hummed an ageless lullaby, and the colony answered with a velvet drone pitched to the key of surrender, parting to reveal combs translucent as morning amber. With an ivory spoon, she drew 3 golden streams and let them ribbon into the bowl, blending sweetness with perfume until the mixture glowed faintly from within. Beneath a pergola, she crushed the harvest with a rose quartz pestle. Each slow turn released oils that mingled with honey, darkening the brew before it brightened again to the soft lilac of early twilight. She whispered words Eileithyia had once taught her syllables, meant to usher gentle arrivals, asking the potion to settle into minds as softly as the echo of childhood lullabies. To refine the fragrance, she beckoned Zephyrus, mildest of winds, who arrived smelling of fig leaves and picnic laughter. One playful exhale whisked away heavy vapors, leaving only silken sweetness behind. When he departed, The potion shimmered with mote-like crystals, invisible yet eager to cling to wings. Aphrodite dipped a fingertip and tasted. First lavender hush, then honey nostalgia, and finally a whisper of forgetfulness, the exact shade of peace the world longed for. Next came the carriers. She selected 50 veteran bees, their stripes dulled by many seasons, and thus unlikely to draw mortal eyes. One by one she brushed their wings with the potion, using a squirrel hair wand, murmuring gratitude for their coming journey. On contact, the delicate panes bloomed with faint opalescence, glowing whenever angled toward starlight. The bees themselves buzzed slower, as if already weighted with tranquility. With the remaining elixir, she filled fragile ampules of dream glass, sealing each with a breath so light it scarcely disturbed the surface. Hermes would tuck them into his satchel at dawn, ready to scatter gentle nightfall across valleys too wide for bees alone. She set the crystal bowl at the hive entrance and watched the fragrant liquid seep into comb and wood, embedding the lullaby deep within wax corridors. The colony flowed past her ankles in dignified procession, each bee pausing as if to nod before vanishing into honeyed dark. Task complete. Aphrodite rinsed her hands in a basin of moonlit water. For an instant the surface turned rose gold, then cleared to reveal her reflection, serene and luminous. Beyond the trellis, frogs rehearsed unhurried croaks, already harmonizing with the unseen hum drifting through cypress branches. She closed her eyes and let one last breath of jasmine, honey, and lavender settle inside her chest. "Carry tenderness," she whispered toward the hive in the night. "And wherever you land, let worry loosen like an undone braid." A soft breeze answered, lifting the fragrance skyward toward Olympus, where even thunder might pause to inhale. Aphrodite smiled, certain the world was one step closer to dreaming. Hermes perched on the eastern parapet of Olympus, legs dangling through wisps of cloud, quill balanced in moonlight. The feather, dipped in the pale blaze that rims the horizon before dawn, left no ink on parchment, only a soft glow as if the page remembered tomorrow. Across his knees lay lambskin thin enough to flutter whenever he exhaled, yet strong enough to outlast mountain winds. He closed his eyes and listened outward. Goat bells chimed on far slopes, an oar tapped against a harbor skiff, and under both the steadier drone of bees gathering in the forge. Each sound fixed a tiny star inside his mind's sky. Opening his eyes, he breathed once and lowered the quill. One sweeping line became the spine of Parnassus, curling into the Gulf of Corinth. Attica followed, mapped like an open palm ready to receive sleep. Rivers unfurled as silver threads. Villages earned spirals where anxious hearts clustered. Every mark glimmered, then faded to embers under ash. He paused to let cricket rhythms guide the air currents he would chart. Their patterns of 5 and 7 strokes translated into invisible highways where the coming swarm could glide without turbulence, shedding honey-scented downdrafts, gentle as blessings. Torch smoke from distant temples drifted up, flavored with prayer some begged for wealth, others for forgetfulness. Hermes tasted the worry in it, and dotted troubled districts with wider spirals, so the bees would linger longer, dosing rooftops until furrowed brows eased. Where valleys broadened, he sketched 3 concentric rings-resting pools for the swarm. Where war camps crouched along cliff edges, he bent the route wide, wishing soldiers peace, yet sparing them confusion. Even mercy prefers discretion. Through the palace walls, Hera's pulse fluttered once, reminding him that a single sting could undo the plan. He etched a reed motif beside each settlement, a quiet caution woven into the map's glow. Stars drifted west, and the quill's light dimmed with them. But the chart acquired its own luster. A spiraled path beginning at the bronze hive, winding over farms and beaches, vanishing into the promise of dawn. He blew across the lambskin. The drawing settled, lines faintly ringing like glass after a toast. Rolling the parchment, he tied it with lavender-scented cord bees, adored the perfume, and would follow the thread like children chasing a ribbon dancer. Only then did he lace on his winged sandals. Their feathers trembled, eager. "Patience," he whispered, stroking one gilded vein. He stepped from the parapet. The sandals slowed his fall until he touched down inside the darkened forge where the bronze casket waited. Bees clustered like living topaz. He laid the scroll beside them, and at once they arranged themselves along its glow, validating every curve. The first blade of sunlight kissed the palace spire. Hermes felt its warmth and, for a fleeting breath, the drowse he was gifting others tugged at his own eyelids. Soon he would rest, but duty moved ahead of dreaming. Before leaving, he walked the length of the forge, letting fingertips brush cooling anvils and sleeping hammers. Metal carried echoes of battles it would never see. Tonight those echoes dulled to a hush. In one corner lay the mantle Hephaestus had woven silver feathers, breathing as if already alive. Hermes bowed to it, understanding it would soon become the heart of the swarm's gentle engine. Outside, he paused on a balcony draped in climbing vine. Below stretched the meadows he had charted midnight fields quilted in dew, their grasses sighing under wind, made fragrant by Aphrodite's brew. He envisioned shepherds lifting sleepy heads as the hum passed over, seeing nothing but stars, feeling everything soften within. He added this picture to his inner constellation, a promise of peace to test the map's accuracy. He drew a final breath of night part-time, part forge smoke, part distant surf fan, pressed it into his chest as though storing it for later. Then, with a flick of sandals, he arrowed toward the horizon, carrying both map and breeze, the two necessary halves of direction. Hera sat alone on the western balcony of Olympus, a cloister carved from pearl-tinted stone where ivy curled like green ink along the columns. Night was thinning toward dawn, yet the palace below still shimmered with drifting lantern glow. She had kept vigil while others slept, listening to the hush that now floated everywhere, and she felt its sweetness soaking into the joints of marble the way rain seeps into warm bread. Yet, beneath that softness, she sensed a brittle edge, the sharp seed of harm nested inside every new gift. She traced a fingertip around the rim of a chalice of spring water. Each circle coaxed a bell-like tone that melted into the quiet. Bees already seeded the air, their music folded in the breeze like gold thread in linen, and Hera admired the craft. Still she remembered how easily mortals bruise. Even the gentlest wing casts a shadow. If a single sting fell on fear, the lullaby could curdle into alarm, and sleep would scatter like startled doves. A pale cloud drifted up the cliff face. Inside its vapor floated the silver mantle Hephaestus had woven, guided by Hermes and his lavender cord. Hera watched it billow like a second moon, each feather catching first light and returning it as muted pearl. Behind her, Zeus waited in the colonnade, pretending to study a mural, yet clearly listening for her verdict. She spoke the name of every city Hermes had plotted, letting each syllable fall like pebbles into still water. With every name she pictured market stalls, swaddled infants, dogs guarding threshing floors. She imagined how trust might fracture if those dogs woke uneasy beneath an unfamiliar hum. Her voice never rose above a whisper, yet the marble carried it to Zeus. The words reached him not as scold, but as gentle arithmetic, a ledger of costs should caution slip. Zeus stepped onto the balcony. The mantle's light softened the lines of his face until he seemed once more the boy hidden long ago in a Cretan cave. Hera laid her palm on his shoulder and felt the vibration of bees inside the fabric, a heartbeat only newly born. She did not rebuke him. Instead, she offered a story. Long ago, a swallow built its nest above the palace hearth. When the chicks hatched, they chirped through every council. Hera let them stay, but one night, a torch spat a stray ember. The nest caught fire. In the panic, a chick's wing was singed. Hera remembered cradling that tiny body, feeling its frantic flutter, understanding that small injuries can echo through vast halls. She would not watch such echo ripple across Greece tonight. Zeus bowed his head. The mantle dimmed as though listening. Hera lifted her fingers to show a single mote of potion clinging there. Already a numb warmth tingled along her wrist. She smiled to prove she did not fear it, yet the lesson gleamed. Comfort tastes different on every tongue. She drew a slender bronze pin from her hair and pressed it at the mantle's throat. The pin's head was a closed lily, emblem of measured bloom. Softly she set a binding. The swarm must hover above each settlement, sampling the air before releasing hum. If panic surfaced, they would rise and circle wider until hearts steadied. The cloth shimmered, accepting the condition. Zeus draped the mantle fully across his shoulders. Its weightless folds settled like breath on still water. Hera thought she heard thunder stray from his veins. Then it faded into the shared rhythm of wings. He thanked her without words, squeezing her hand the way he once sealed rainbows after summer storms, when the world was still learning names. Below the balcony, the bronze hive stirred, sensing its cue. Hera leaned on the rail and watched little whirlpools of vapors spiral upward, eager to meet the dawn. She allowed herself a long breath and released it through a quiet smile. Caution, she knew, was not the enemy of wonder. It was the lantern that carries wonder safely through dark rooms. The first rays of sun found her there, painting amber across her cheek, while the hush of bees rolled outward in even promise, a lullaby tempered by warning, ready to cradle the waking world. Dawn slid over Olympus, tinting the forge courtyard pale rose, a hush that made even cooling anvils look soft. Wisps of last night's smoke curled upward, fragrant with cedar and glowing coal, spiraling round columns like sleepy serpents. Between the silent hammers, the bronze hive breathed out a single gleam of light. The ribbon shimmered gold in sun and silver in shade, dividing into twisting strands that remembered dream more than metal, hovering like mist that had learned choreography. Inside, bees stirred. They lifted one wing, tasted air, then rose in slow agreement that morning had come. Hephaestus's moon-tempered alloy glowed faint along their bodies. Aphrodite's lavender, honey pollen frosted the dark stripes. Thyme and jasmine clung to antennae, tiny scarves announcing a night's careful brewing. The queen emerged, bronze-banded thorax throbbing like a gentle drum. She sampled Hera's lily-shaped binding woven into the breeze and approved. Her wings unfolded with temple door ceremony, and the hum that poured out was a first lullaby note, low, rounded, persuasive enough to make marble lean closer. Bees stepped onto warm stones, drawing rings that widened like pond ripples. Above them drifted the mantle once on Zeus feather metal threads, drinking newborn light until it became a shallow dawn-colored dome. Its underside mirrored the swarm, so every insect appeared doubled, body beside dream. Zeus watched in half-shadow, thunder in his chest matching the hum's base. Hermes balanced on a shield, traced glowing map lines whenever a circle closed. Hephaestus wiped soot from his palms, marveling that fire-forged feathers now floated like embroidery cut loose from cloth. A cyclops peeked from the forge door, eyes wide, then slipped back inside to let the miracle proceed. The courtyard's final torch guttered. Zephyrus sent a cool draft to confirm clear routes below. Rings stretched into ellipses, braiding through the mantle until cloth and insects fused into a single shimmering creature. It lifted lazily, like a contagious yawn crossing a crowded hall. Shepherds on distant slopes, rubbing sleep from their eyes, saw what looked like a pale lantern drifting upward, and felt their shoulders loosen without understanding why. Hera stepped to an upper balcony, ivy trembling round her ankles. 2 fingers to her lips blessed the swarm. It dimmed a shade, holding joy the way musicians mute strings when the conductor nods. The living dome angled east along Hermes's lavender-scented spirals, leaving a sigh of honey in its wake. At the edges, scouts peeled off in pairs, trailing fragrant threads that curled like ink in water. They tested for drafts of fear, hovered, listened, returned. Reassured, the swarm climbed above the tallest colonnade and paused, breath held, while first light washed over metal wings. Rainbows scattered across white stone so briefly that dormant statues seemed to stretch. Soft as a sleeper's exhale, the mass drifted forward. Its hum settled into the comfort kettle register, steady and sure like warm water before the boil. Below, guards slipped helmets off to listen. Sparrows tucked heads beneath wings, and the palace fell deeper into hush. In stables, horses lowered eyelids. In kitchens, ladles paused mid-stir, mesmerized by sound felt more than heard. The bees flowed over the parapet like liquid twilight, beginning their descent toward Attica, following Hermes's chart of sleepless towns and wary camps. Ahead lay olive groves, fishing coves, and city gates where sentries paced. Soon those sentries would lift their faces, breathe the scented air, and forget why their fists were tight. Every street torch, every brazier, would glow softer under the unexpected peace. High above, the mantle gathered light for the journey, reflecting the swarm's silhouette into the clouds so that distant sailors glimpsed double constellations and murmured omens into the rigging. Somewhere, a poet who had sat up all night searching for a last line felt the humming in his teeth and fell asleep over fresh ink, satisfied at last. Olympus watched the departure. Mountain and gods alike wrapped in the promise that, for this sunrise at least, great power had chosen to speak only in whispers. May it travel far. The swarm crossed the last broken crags of Olympus and glided into open sky, an opal-tinted dome cupped by dawn. Below, Attica unrolled in muted greens and pearl-gray stone, her valley still breathing night mist. Olive trees patterned the slopes like quiet constellations, slender trunks casting shadows that resembled harp strings stretched across the fields. A shepherd named Theron stood on one of those slopes, cloak pulled tight, the smell of dew and sheep wool mixed in his lungs. He had been awake since stars ruled the sky, yet his thoughts churned faster than the flock's bells. The first sign was the hush. Birdsong thinned, breeze softened, even distant dogs stalled mid-bark. Then light shifted, as though someone held rosy glass over the sun. Theron looked up. Where he expected empty air, he found a drifting canopy, luminous and alive. Thousands of bees moved as one, the mantle above them pulsing gently, feather metal threads catching early sunlight and scattering it in tiny prisms. The hum issued from every point at once, a sound deep enough to settle into spine and heart without stopping at the ear. Fear almost rose, but Hera's lily-bound caution guided the swarm. Scouts peeled away, arced low over the grove, and released only fragrance lavender, thyme, a shy note of jasmine before circling back. The scent spread like invisible tidewater, lapping against Theron's cheeks. His pulse slowed, anxious loops of thought untied themselves. Around him, ewes ceased their nervous stamping and settled onto knees slick with dew. Lambs, moments earlier looking for mischief, curled into tufts of fleece, eyelids sliding shut. The main column passed overhead. Pollen dust drifted from wings, flickering gold in sunlight, landing on branches and cloaks like soft hail that melted instantly. Where it touched olive leaves, silvery undersides brightened. Where it settled on Theron's hair, dreams bloomed behind his eyes, visions of warm fires and laughter that had not yet happened. He sank to the grass, shoulders slack, the hum filling him until even breath felt optional. Farther downslope, the swarm's shadow rippled across stone terraces and vaulted low walls, brushing over field hands gathering figs. Calloused fingers paused mid-reach, and smiles replaced lines of fatigue. A laborer leaned against a basket brimming with fruit and murmured a children's rhyme he had not spoken in decades. The words floated away on the same breeze that carried the perfume onward. The bees altered altitude, following Hermes' map like musicians tracing sheet music. They skimmed a river narrow as ribbon, wings brushing its mirrored surface so lightly that only concentric sighs marked the touch. Fish beneath lingered a heartbeat longer near the top, lulled by something they could neither hear nor smell, sensing only safety. At the first hamlet, clay chimneys exhaled breakfast smoke. Infants fussed in reed cradles, and roosters crowed a half-note too sharp for dawn's serenity. The swarm dipped, letting a low chord of humming pour through rafters. Rooftop tiles warmed. Roosters hushed mid-call, tilting their heads as though trying to remember the next note. Mothers setting bread dough found their wrists moving slower, kneading in rhythm with a lullaby they never learned. Cradles stilled, and small fists uncurled like petals in sun. The queen guided her hive past the steeple of a tiny temple to Demeter. The priest, there an old man cataloging seed jars, felt the vibration before he saw light shifting along the walls. His back straightened, not from alarm but recognition, as though some ancient festival had returned unannounced. He stepped outside, raised both palms, and received a fine dusting of pollen. Tears sprang, though he could not name their root. Sorrow leaving, gratitude entering, perhaps both. Throughout Attica the morning continued, yet clocks inside people drifted to a slower measure. Potters let wheels spin half a breath longer before shaping clay. Sailors on the coast delayed untying moorings, preferring to watch sunlight dance on calm water. Even gossip slackened in the agora, words replaced by contented nods. Everywhere, the hum threaded through marble, vine, and vein, teaching the land to pulse in unison. High above, the mantle captured each heartbeat of the scene and sent it humming forward, ready for the next valley. The swarm pressed on, a shimmering hush heading south, leaving behind terraces glistening with dew, turned tiny prisms, and 1,000 hearts newly acquainted with stillness. Theron would remember only that dawn arrived sweeter than any before, and that fear, for reasons he could not name, had felt unwilling to rise. The swarm drifted east until a wide plain unfurled below, quilted with wheat and violet iris. It slowed, hovering just above treetops, and let a low hum seep through chimney cracks and shutter slats. Sunrise gilded windows, yet rooms stayed dim. Curtains moved only when thousands of wings beat together, wafting lavender, jasmine perfume over sleeping faces. One by one, villagers slipped past ordinary slumber, sinking into deeper honeyed dark. Eleni the baker dreamed first. She walked a glowing honeycomb hallway that smelled of vanilla and new bread. When her finger brushed a wax cell, it opened into a memory of her grandmother scattering caraway seeds across rye dough. The taste of warm loaf filled her chest, and laughter rang like a bell down adjoining tunnels. Farther in, little Nikos drifted a walnut shell boat along a slow, golden river. Constellations he had never mastered bent low, introduced themselves, and dropped into his palm as warm marbles. Each thrum of the river matched the swarm's hum, promising chores could wait without punishment. Near the village edge, old Stavros entered a crescent-shaped cell. Wax benches brightened into silhouettes of friends long gone. No words were spoken, yet forgiveness passed like shared bread, and dull memories regained shine. When the figures rose, they left behind the smell of rain on pine evidence that grief can bloom. High overhead, the queen's pulse tolled like a distant bell. Through hexagonal windows, sleepers glimpsed other reveries. A shepherd twirling with lambs that left spark trails, a potter spinning a sun-bright jar that whispered tide rhythms, a tailor stitching daylight into cloaks. The scenes glowed, then faded, gentle as lanterns glimpsed from a carriage. No one woke. In waking rooms, shutters rattled twice, then fell still. Chickens nestled beak to wing. Cows chewed slower, even water in pitchers calmed. A single bee perched on each lintel, wings folded like praying hands. If a breath hitched with worry, the guardian shivered, releasing perfume to guide the mind back toward honey corridors. Few threads were needed. Fear found no purchase. Mid-morning light brightened fields, yet indoor shadows stayed cool and long. Outside clocks edged toward noon, but inside hours wound down to hush. The swarm hovered, mantle gleaming like a slow-turning coin. Bees swapped positions, so the youngest bore least weight. Veterans held the rim, reading air for tremors. Hera's lily pin flashed whenever sunlight kissed it, reminding all that gentleness needs tending. Before departing, the swarm followed the river that laced the plain, tracing each bend as though signing its name in ripple and light. Scouts skimmed the surface, wingtips dimpling water into rings stretching bank to bank. Fish hovered beneath the silver lattice of vibration, Dragonflies paused on pollen, dusted backs and rode a heartbeat before leaping skyward in turquoise sparks. Children near open shutters stirred at the cool breeze, then sighed and tucked quilts beneath chins. The hum slipped through reeds, teaching them to sway in time, and a lone heron, ankle-deep in shallows, closed its eyes as dawn burnished its feathers. At last, the queen beat her wings 3 times. The hum shifted from cradle song to measured heartbeat signaling dreams had rooted, and mortals might rise when ready. Across the plain, eyelids fluttered. Eleni woke first, palms warm, rye sweetness lingering on her tongue. Nikos smiled, fingers curled around invisible marbles. Stavros exhaled lightly, shoulders free of old names. Seeing peace hold, the swarm climbed, pollen motes tumbling like tiny comets. Noon heat shimmered across wheat, stalks nodding as though greeting a secret breeze. Villagers would remember little, perhaps only honey on windowsills, or a half-heard song that loosened not yet their footsteps would land softer, and later laughter at ale benches would float farther through the room. High above, the mantle folded its feathers, ready for the next valley where restless soldiers sharpened spears. But for now, the plain lay quiet. Dream cells glowing under sun-baked roof-samber pockets of stillness cooling by slow degrees. With a final chord, the hive turned south, its hum thinning to a purr while honeycomb halls within countless minds stayed ajar, waiting for dusk to brush the sky with blue. The hum found Ares at the edge of a ravine where red-tinted torches guttered over armor racks and sharpening wheels. Dawn had barely broken here. War camps rise early, and this one bristled like a hedgehog awakened too soon. Rows of tents crowded the slope, canvas flapping with growls of restless soldiers. Black-plumed helmets lay beside whetstones. Swords screeched along steel, and somewhere cymbals clanged in rehearsal for terror. Ares strode among them, greeting each sound like an old drinking companion. Bronze cuirass catching firelight, spear butts striking sparks off rock. He was rehearsing thunder in his throat when a new vibration slipped through the din. It pulsed beneath the rattling chains and hammered shields, subtle as pulse against fingertips. The war god frowned, twisting the spear to locate the odd echo. Instead of clamor, he heard resonance around it, low and strangely inviting, as though a choir of hearths had begun to sing. Above the camp the mantle glided, silver feathers dimmed so soldiers would not see a target. Bees poured beneath the cloth like molten topaz, wings stroking the air in slow, unified beats. Scouts peeled off, drawing figure eights between watchtowers, tasting the atmosphere for panic. They returned bearing only smoke, sweat, and the brittle smell of tension. Satisfied, the swarm descended another handspan and released the perfume. Lavender, thyme, a hush of honey that softened torch edges until flames seemed dipped in cream. Ares raised his spear for a better look. Pollen caught the torchlight and fell in glittering arcs, landing on gauntlets, greaves, and the god's own helmet plume. The metal lost its harsh glint. Swords looked suddenly ceremonial, like silver reeds meant for dance. Steel rang less like threat and more like distant bells over harvest fields. The god's fist tightened, instinctively resistant, yet the hum threaded into the rivets of his breastplate, vibrating bone and blood until his heartbeat slowed to its cadence. The familiar itch for discord ebbed. He tried to summon anger, but found the spark damp, as if rain had reached his inner forge. He lowered the spear a fraction. Across the camp, soldiers paused mid-sharpening. One youth knew enough that cheek hardly bore, stubble blinked at the falling pollen, and thought of orchard blossoms from his mother's hill. His whetstone stopped. Another veteran, scarred from chin to wrist, slid a sword half drawn, then let it rest. Surprised to discover his shoulders ache less when not braced for charge. Conversations quieted to murmurs. Dice clattered slower. Even camp dogs halted growls to sniff the sweetened air. The mantle drifted closer, low enough that its reflection shimmered on helmet crests. Hera's lily pin gleamed a ward against rashness, and the swarm obeyed, easing the hum's volume so hearts adjusted instead of bursting. Ares caught that gleam, recognized the queenly caution, and gauged his own response. He could hurl the spear, scatter the bees, call down iron hail. Yet the lullaby pressed kindness into marrow, reminding him of forgotten tavern nights where laughter outweighed bruises, of battle aftercare, when wounded foes received water before ransom. The spear butt slipped from his fingers. It hit the earth with a dull thunk, blade sinking into loam. Eyes widened around camp. To see Ares disarmed was to glimpse winter sunriserary, impossible, mesmerizing. He ignored their stares, watching instead a single bee alight on the spear shaft. It bowed its wings like a bard finishing a song, then rose, leaving a glint of nectar that smelled faintly of cedar smoke and fresh bread. Ares exhaled, long and uneven. The breath sounded more sigh than snarl. He reached to reclaim the weapon, but paused, palm hovering. The metal felt distant, unnecessary. Instead, he unbuckled the heavy cuirass, letting it rest beside the spear. Chain links settled with a hush, surprised to be relieved before dusk. Beneath the armor, his chest rose freely, each inhale echoing the swarm's slow tempo. All around, soldiers followed without command. Spears grounded, shields set aside, helms removed. Wheel spokes ceased spinning. War drums rolled into silence. Someone tugged a lyre from a pack, plucked a tentative chord that blended with the hive's drone-like river melding with sea. A cook poured watered wine and discovered it tasted richer no grit of fear lining tongue. The swarm hovered long enough to imprint calm, then lifted. Bees spiraled upward, pollen fog dispersing, mantle catching light, and sliding east toward distant surf. As shadow left the camp, men and women looked at each other as if meeting first time unarmed. Ares watched the departing gleam until it vanished, then flexed empty hands. They tingled, not with rage, but with unfamiliar weightlessness. He let them hang by his sides, thinking how quiet might be another form of readiness, how stillness, too, could guard a world. The swarm reached the Aegean at noon, cobalt swells hammering cliffs, while gulls shrieked against salt-flung wind. A veil of mantle light brushed the water, and whitecaps that had slapped limestone all morning flattened into long sighs. Beneath the hush, Poseidon's coral palace quivered. He had spent dawn roiling shoals and shaping storm heads wide as islands. Now he burst through a turquoise funnel, trident raining sapphire beads, ready to defend his surf. Instead of a fleet, he found a drifting aurora of bees, every wing a mirror catching sun. Their hum vibrated plankton and coaxed breakers into velvet. Fishing boats that had pitched since sunrise ceased bobbing, masts aligned like disciplined spears. On deck, sailors exhaled knots they hadn't known they held. The perfume reached him next. Lavender braided with brine, honey rinsed in kelp. It smelled of seal, quiet coves, and slack. Water dawns when even gulls whisper. His annoyance faltered. Hera's lily caution trembled inside the Droneno challenge here. Only invitation. The queen dipped, skimming wave tops. Wings sliced light into glitter that fell like shattered halos. Each pass stitched calm seams across the chop. Sardines pivoted in silver clouds, kelp forests slowed their sway, and an orca mother answered the lullaby with a basso purr. Poseidon rumbled a query through the water column. A scout landed on the trident, dropped a single mote that burst into the scent of dockside morning snatch spread for repair, tar warm under bare feet. Storm fronts he had banked on the horizon faltered, then folded. Along the littoral amphorae of temple oil steadied. Wicks burned even. Children racing crabs paused, hearing hush inside their pulses. A trireme crammed with hoplites found the sea gentle as bathwater. Oars kissed the surface without splash. Chants softened to hums aligned with the hive. The bees wove low above tidal caves, sealing their echoes with honeycomb resonance. Sea calves dozed in sun-lacquered shallows, dreaming of wide, quiet bays. Farther down, octopuses uncurled from fearful ink clouds, tasting change in the current. It spoke of safe nightfall. Poseidon lifted a palm. Foam spiraled up his wrist, then melted as fingers opened in concession. Restlessness, he realized, was not the same as power. He lowered the trident to mirror flat water, carving 3 luminous rings that drifted outward like blessings stamped on a coin. The hive replied with a deeper chord that slid through coral arches, telling every creature tides would stay mild. Dolphins breached beside the mantle's reflection, spraying diamond rain. A sea turtle surfaced, paddling beneath the rainbow dome, like a slow-moving signature of consent. Even distant whales tuned their songs a note lower, weaving the lullaby into migrant hymns. Seeing calm hold, the swarm banked south, shedding a final shower of glitter that clung to the sea, God's beard like warm sand. He folded dormant storm clouds flat, smoothing them as sailors flatten wrinkled sailcloth. The Aegean's color shifted from battle blue to turquoise touched with gold. Nets rose heavy with untorn promise. Fishermen glanced skyward and whispered of bees that taught the ocean to breathe evenly. Seabirds circled but did not scream. They glided on the new slow thermals, wings glistening with stray pollen. On rocky ledges, monks copying tides onto wax tablets paused to note the sudden stillness, writing a line that compared peace to hidden hives. In a cliff-edge shrine, the high priestess, who had spent sunrise preparing oil to placate the sea, felt the marble beneath her sandals warm, as though the deity himself whispered assurance upward. She tipped her amphora, watching the surface remain perfectly level, and understood her petition had already been answered. She knelt, not in fear, but in gratitude for a calm larger than prayer. Poseidon watched until the last glint vanished, then slipped beneath the bright surface, heart beating slow as whale song. For the first time in an age he savored deep water, lying unruffled, and he pictured sailors, dolphins, even shy coral polyps, resting easy until evening tide drew silver across the sand. He smiled an undertow of contentment, and let the sea hold its breath a little while longer before resuming its endless dance. The afternoon sun lay lazily across the hills when the swarm drifted inland from the calming sea. They approached a lonely ridge, where white marble blocks crouched in weeds, the ruined shrine of a small village long moved to safer ground. Only one caretaker remained, an aging priest named Philomenos, who tended cracked altars and cracked memories. He had rung the bronze bell at dawn and again at noon, though no congregation answered, hoping the echo might climb the sky and remind the gods that promises, even neglected ones, still mattered. The hum arrived first as a faint vibration in the bell rope. Philomenos thought a breeze had strayed up the slope, then noticed incense smoke curling straight rather than sideways. He stepped outside. The sky above the colonnade shimmered like heated glass, not with fire but with luminous wings. A dim silver cloth floated at the center, and the bees below moved in deliberate circles as if sketching a new roof for the ruined sanctuary. He felt neither fear nor awe, only a quiet recognition that the day had come to collect an old prayer. Years earlier, before drought scattered his flock, Philomenos had begged Olympus for soft sleep for his fevered villagers. No envoy answered, and the town faded, leaving him to guard stone and unanswered petitions. Now lavender and thyme drifted through cedar doors, wrapping his wrists like warm bracelets. His pulse steadied, matching the low song overhead. A single scout settled on the cracked altar where a votive lamp still burned. It brushed dusty marble with its forelegs, leaving a sparkle that soaked into the stone and spread outward like dew. The fractured lines softened, seams between blocks glowed pearled white, and a faint warmth traveled into the priest's fingertips when he touched the surface. He closed his eyes, tasted honey and cool spring water, then whispered, almost forgetting how speech sounded, "Welcome." The queen guided the swarm lower until the mantle shaded the courtyard from harsh light. Bees arranged themselves along cracked lintels and leaning columns, their bodies completing missing flutes and capitals, so that for a moment the ruin looked whole again. Philomenos stood among them, robe fluttering gently, imagining the forgotten congregation seated once more on worn benches, each brow unlined. He pressed both palms to his chest, and from that stillness shaped a wish he had never dared utter aloud. "Let rest visit every wanderer," he murmured, not for a moment, but for as long as hearts need. The words rode the hum upward, weaving through silver feathers to the mantle edge. There the sound deepened, echoed, then scattered like seeds across the wind. Beyond the ridge, dusty paths that carried traders and refugees began to shimmer. Footfalls slackened, packs dropped, and travelers sat beneath olives, sharing figs in amiable silence, while eyelids drifted half-closed. Philomenos opened his eyes to see bees lifting again. They circled the bell tower, and with each lap the ancient bronze lost a patch of verdigris, regaining quiet shine. Finally the queen climbed, and the cloth of feathers followed, leaving a last glint that settled on the priest's brow like a soft crown. He did not feel elevation, only lightness, the removal of a stone he had carried alone for seasons beyond counting. Afternoon heat returned as the humming receded, but the temple no longer appeared abandoned. Sunlight reflected from newly bright columns, and wild poppies growing through flagstones nodded as though acknowledging Mass just ended. Philomenos struck the bell once more. The note rang clear, rolled across hill and valley, and reached the napping traders, who smiled in their sleep, dreaming of cool water and generous roads. The priest lowered the rope, folded hands, and let gratitude echo through his ribs. Far above, Hermes marked the fulfillment on his glowing chart, while Hera's lily pin winked approval. The swarm glided toward distant orchards, but Philomenos watched until the last sparkle vanished behind hills. He whispered thanks to whichever god had remembered a priest forgotten by his own prayers, then set fresh oil in the lamp. Evening would come, but tonight flame and heart would burn slow, steadied by a gift carried on gentle wings. First light spilled across Greece, thinning the last blue of night into pearl. The hush the bees had carried drifted down as dew, beating barley heads and tile roofs as though the darkness itself sighed in relief. After 12 gentle hours aloft, the swarm reached the open meadows of Helicon, chosen for their broad sky and patient wind. The silver mantle descended first, feathers dulled to ash. Beneath it the bees traced widening rings, each closing like an iris around the newborn sun. At the center the queen folded her wings. The hum slid from bass to whisper until dawn seemed to hold its breath. Circles loosened. Bees spiraled outward, and when light caught their bodies, they burst into sparks more radiance than matter. The rest settled on blossom, ridgepole, and hollow oak, trading celestial duty for the ordinary labor of hives. Across Attica, sleepers woke free of half-told dreams. Shepherd Theron laughed to find his sheep still dozing, ears flicking toward a fading song. Eleni set hot loaves on a sill and tasted the first morning she ever baked. Nikos traced dew-strung webs that glittered like fallen constellations, while old Stavros hummed a tune he trusted without knowing. In Ares's camp, spear points were sticky with honey. Soldiers wiped them clean, yet felt no urge to grind them, content to watch dawn creep between tent seams. Far out on the Aegean, sailors tasted lavender in kettle water, chuckled at the sorcery, and let their nets drift deeper, sure of the sea's new gentleness. Poseidon's coral halls rang like distant bells as tides steadied. On Olympus, forge coals, temple chimes, and armor racks exhaled together, a sound between sigh and yawn. Hera leaned on her balcony, ivy tracing her sleeve, and watched dew flash from every leaf-tiny mirrors of the night's labor. She touched the lily pin and let silence stretch unmeasured. Hermes dropped beside Hephaestus's anvil, parchment map now dull, its glowing paths spent. He slid it into a bronze tube. The smith answered with a soot-smudged grin. Sparks in Hephaestus's beard rose briefly, then nested back to sleep. Both gods knew the moon metal feathers would fade by noon, turning to unremarkable ore scattered across grass. But for now, they glittered like frost under sunlight. Above them, Zeus stood on a cloud's rim and watched the last mote of pollen drift earthward. Thunder lounged tame behind his ribs. With a gesture, the bronze hive floated upward, folding into a gleaming sleep mask. He set it across his eyes and let a breeze cradle him, the leftover lullaby humming at his temples. Somewhere below, a market gong rang, yet the king of gods did not stir. At last, rest had claimed its master. On Helicon, the empty mantle loosened. Threads of moon metal snapped with the soft sound of combed hair and drifted apart, each flashing once before vanishing into blue. Dew coursed down meadow stems, carrying sweetness to roots that had endured lean years. A tortoise lifted its head, sampled the air, and decided the day would be kind. Market squares filled slowly. Voices dropped half an octave, reluctant to shatter the hush. A potter steadied a wobbling wheel with laughter instead of curses. The town crier cleared his throat twice before daring the first proclamation. The hum was gone, yet its outline lingered in pauses, in the lazy swing of door hinges, in the longer blink of every passer-by. By mid-morning, the only trace of the night's passage was a scent braided through sunshine lavender and time steeped in gold. Anyone who breathed it felt shoulders loosen and thoughts drift like kites above inland fields. Greece moved forward, but softer, as though each heart had rediscovered its own dimmer switch and would gladly use it at dusk. Thus the swarm became daylight. The lullaby became silence, and peace once a shy visitor claimed a seat beside every hearth with no intention of leaving soon. Night climbed Olympus softly. Darkness now a student of the bees. Torches along the colonnade winked out until only starlight dusted marble. In the forge court, Hephaestus polished the bronze hive, cooling it from ember to quiet metal, then lined each seam with lunar silver strips that chimed when touched, turning leftover thunder into lullaby. Zeus arrived barefoot, robe loose, hair damp from a final bath in mountain mist. The polished door opened at his touch, releasing a sigh of lavender salt air that loosened knots in his calves and unclenched fingers accustomed to lightning. A shallow groove around the doorway filled with pollen from the swarm-breathed perfume each time he crossed, a gate of scented silence. Within, wax-lined walls glowed amber around a cloud couch that remembered every shape it welcomed. Faint silhouettes shimmered on those panel shepherds under stars, sails on glassy seas, a spear abandoned beside a campfire, memories left by bees brushing bronze, a miniature atlas of peace. Zeus studied them and felt no urge to intervene. Watching was enough. He sat, testing the couch like any traveler. A small, almost mortal smile unfolded as the cloud wrapped his shoulders, easing centuries of thunder from bone and muscle. Breath slowed. His chest rose in time with the hive's quiet drone. When he exhaled, the room brightened, then drank the sound, leaving deeper hush behind. One ribbon of moonlight slipped through a narrow vent, painting his brow silver and throwing sparks across the ceiling. Outside, Olympus held its breath. Fountains hushed, vines stilled, even sentry winds curled elsewhere so as not to rattle a cornice. Behind closed eyes bloomed gentle scenes bees over orchards. Poseidon's calm sea, Hera's lily pin threads of honey and thyme weaving into a single soothing cloth. His heartbeat slowed to match the hive's cadence. Warmth spread upward like dawn across a windowsill. Hephaestus closed the door, latching it with a tiny sleeping bee clasp, then left on muffled feet. From a parapet, Hermes tipped his winged cap. The map's final line had come true. High along the promenade, Hera paused, feeling the mountain's pulse beat cat-like in sleep, and whispered good night into the wind. Stars wheeled. In Ares's camp, armor lay untouched. On the sea, Poseidon traced lazy spirals in sand. Aphrodite's roses bowed over dozing bees. One by one, vigilant hearts surrendered to softer currents, trusting the night's new order. Within the hive, Zeus dreamed simple things: wind in olive branches, rain on fresh thatch, a dog's drowsy snore. Dreams belonging to ordinary lives, borrowed only for the night. The bronze cooled, its last glow settling into filigree. Seen from outside, it was merely art at rest. Yet an attentive ear could still catch the gentle rhythm of a king learning to breathe like any other man. Columns seemed less stern, Statues leaned as though listening. Olympus recalled what the bees etched across land and sea. True power inhabits the pause, the breath allowing every heart to find quiet. Night continued its slow climb toward dawn, carrying peace sturdy enough to outlast storms, yet light enough to rest on a single wing. Inside the hive, Zeus slept on, cradled by bronze and memory, until the first pale birdsong would tap gently at the door. Hours crept by unnoticed. Inside the shell, the hum slipped into the infrasonic register, where mountains murmur to their roots. Vibrations seep through granite seams beneath distant valleys, telling rivers they might meander rather than rush. On coastal cliffs, elderly fishermen felt knees unlace. In pine woods, wolves laid muzzles upon paws, listening instead of howling. Far offshore, a lighthouse keeper halted his patrol, certain the sea had slowed its heartbeat. Even constellations glided more lazily across the dark, as though sky and stone had agreed to an invisible lullaby. Herders guiding goats along high passes later whispered that the rocks themselves were purring, though no storm ever came. The story slows now, like a lantern guttering at dawn. Wherever you rest in the loft under rain, on a sofa beside a ticking clock, feel the hush that drifted from Olympus settle along your collarbones. Let each breath follow the bees. In through lavender fields, across still seas, out through silent stars. Muscles listen, shoulders unlock, jaw floats, eyelids grow heavier. Imagine the bronze hive, cool and dim, cradling a single sleeper in perfect trust. With every inhale, the hive lends you its hum. With every exhale, you give it your worries. Soon the trade is complete, and nothing lingers in your chest but light. Outside, any noise, traffic, wind, restless branches belong to an older part of night, already distant. A nearer hush remains, amber and soft, a honeycomb with room for one more dream. Walk inside without knocking. Corridors glow, memories you left unvisited wait patiently, polished and warm. Choose a pebble beach, laughter and candlelight, and place it beneath your tongue like sweet fruit. Its flavor will carry you farther than any map. There is nothing left to chase. The gods have traded thunder for sleep, and even the sea keeps time by slower drums. Trust their example. If dreams appear, greet them kindly, and let them pass like boats on moonlit water, leaving no wake. Thoughts that try to lift you meet a ceiling of feather-soft dark and drift back down as mist. You begin to float the way pollen floats, calm, directionless, certain only of ease. Remain there. Let the minutes slip their leashes. Dawn will arrive in its own hour, but it will find you restored, an instrument ready for gentler songs. Until then, rest in the hush that began with one hum, and now enfolds every heartbeat yours included in flawless quiet. Good night, dreamer. Sleep well.